The mail carrier, bless his weary heart, slipped the dreaded envelope into my mailbox. It was crisp, white, official-looking, and bore the unmistakable stamp of suburban tyranny, the HOA logo. I sighed. I knew what this was. Karen had struck again. I ripped it open, the crisp paper practically screaming bureaucracy at me. The letter, typed in that soulless font that all official documents use, began with the usual flowery, yet passive-aggressive, greetings. Then, it got to the meat of the matter. My driveway. Apparently, it was excessively long and had a negative impact on neighborhood uniformity. Uniformity? I muttered, my internal monologue kicking into high gear. Last I checked, this wasn't a Stepford community. Unless they're all secretly robots, in which case, my spiral driveway will be the least of their worries. Maybe Karen's the head robot, sent to enforce conformity. That would explain a lot. I grabbed my copy of the city building codes, the one I keep specifically for situations like this, and marched over to the HOA office. It was a beige building, naturally. Beige walls, beige carpet, probably beige staplers. Inside, I found Mrs. Higgins, the HOA president, perched behind her desk like a particularly stern beige-colored bird. "Mrs. Higgins," I began, trying to keep the sarcasm out of my voice, a Herculean task. "I received your letter about my driveway. I have the city building codes right here, and as you can see, my driveway is perfectly compliant." Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses, her gaze as sharp as a tack. "Mr. Alex, isn't it? While your driveway may technically meet city code, it does not meet our aesthetic standards. It disrupts the flow of the neighborhood." "The flow?" I repeated, my sarcasm threatening to breach containment. "You mean the flow of identical houses with identical lawns and identical flower beds? Because, honestly, I thought that flow was a little stagnant." Mrs. Higgins pursed her lips. "We've received several complaints, Mr. Alex. Neighbors are concerned about the length of your driveway." "Karen," I said, not even bothering to hide my eye roll. "Let me guess. She measured it with a ruler and then compared it to everyone else's?" Mrs. Higgins huffed. "That's beside the point. The point is, we're requesting that you shorten your driveway to conform to the neighborhood standard." "And if I don't?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "We'll be forced to issue fines," she said, her voice laced with that bureaucratic sweetness that always meant trouble. "And those fines will escalate until the issue is resolved." "Logic? Reason?" I muttered to myself as I walked out of the beige building, the beige walls seeming to close in on me. Those words clearly aren't in their vocabulary. I might as well be arguing with a brick wall. A very well-manicured, HOA-approved brick wall. The injustice of it all, the sheer pettiness of the complaint, ignited a fire within me. It wasn't just about the driveway anymore. It was about principle. It was about standing up to the tyranny of suburban conformity. "Fine," I said to myself, a slow grin spreading across my face. "You want a shorter driveway? You'll get a shorter driveway. Technically speaking, anyway." The seed of an idea, gloriously ridiculous and utterly petty, had been planted. And it was about to blossom into something truly spectacular. My mind became a whirlwind of architectural mayhem. Each idea that popped into my head was more outlandish than the last. A catapult? Too messy. A drawbridge? Too medieval. Then it hit me. The spiral. It was perfect. It was ridiculous. It was petty genius. "Think Escher meets a parking garage," I muttered to myself, a manic gleam in my eye. "It'll be a masterpiece of petty engineering." I spent the next few days sketching, calculating, and generally losing myself in the glorious details of my revenge plan. Blueprints emerged, covered in annotations and arrows. I even built a miniature model out of cardboard just to visualize the sheer scale of the project. It was magnificent. With my plans finalized, I set out to find a team of contractors willing to bring my vision to life. This proved interesting. The first few contractors I approached looked at me like I was insane. I'd try to explain the concept, using my hands to demonstrate the spiraling motion, and they'd just nod slowly, backing away like I was about to unleash a swarm of wasps. "So, you want a driveway that goes up?" one bewildered contractor asked, his brow furrowed in confusion. "Not just up," I corrected. "Up and around, in a spiral, like a spiral." He blinked. "Like a curly fry?" "Closer," I said, "but bigger, and made of concrete, and with multiple levels?" He just stared at me. I sighed. This was going to be harder than I thought. Finally, I found a crew, a slightly eccentric bunch who, after I showed them the blueprints, immediately recognized the comedic gold mine I had stumbled upon. "You're building a spiral driveway?" The foreman, a burly guy with a handlebar mustache, asked, a grin spreading across his face. "That's right," I said, puffing out my chest a little. "Think of it as performance art, but with concrete." "I like your style," he chuckled. "Let's do this." "They looked at me like I was crazy at first," I recounted later. "Then I showed them the blueprints, and I swear I saw dollar signs in their eyes. Or maybe it was just the reflection of the setting sun. Either way, they were in. The construction began. The neighborhood watched with a mixture of confusion and amusement as the spiral structure began to take shape. Karen, I'm sure, was apoplectic, though I made sure to avoid her. I could practically feel her laser-like gaze boring into the back of my head whenever I ventured outside. It was exhilarating. The sound of construction, the whirring of drills, the clanging of metal was music to my ears. It was the sound of sweet, sweet revenge being built, layer by glorious layer. The day finally arrived. The spiral driveway, my magnum opus of petty revenge, was complete. It wasn't just a driveway. It was a multi-level monstrosity of concrete and steel, a testament to spite-fueled ingenuity. It curved and spiraled, rising like a concrete serpent, culminating in a parking platform that offered a panoramic view of, well, the rest of the neighborhood. I'd even added LED lights, because why not? And decorative railings, because safety first, and also because they looked hilariously out of place. The pièce de résistance, however, was the comically oversized sign I'd placed at the entrance, HOA-approved compact driveway. I stood back, admiring my handiwork. "It's beautiful," I declared to myself, a touch of madness in my voice. "It's ridiculous, it's perfect." The reaction was immediate. It was as if I'd unleashed some sort of suburban Pandora's box. Kids instantly claimed the ramp as their new favorite playground. They were zipping up and down on their bikes, skateboards, even scooters. It was like a mini X Games in my front yard. "This is awesome!" I overheard one kid yell to his friend. "It's like a roller coaster for cars!" Cars were slowing down, people craning their necks to get a better look. I even saw a few people taking pictures. My spiral driveway was officially a tourist attraction. Then came the news. The local news crew showed up with cameras and microphones, dubbing the whole thing the Spiral Driveway Feud. They interviewed me, asking about my motivations, my inspiration, my feelings about the whole situation. "Well," I said to the reporter, trying to keep a straight face, "it all started with a letter, about a driveway, and a certain individual's obsession with uniformity. I even got to give them a tour of the ramp, pointing out the LED lights, the decorative railings, the strategically placed HOA-approved sign. This," I announced dramatically, is where the magic happens. So, Mr. Alex? The reporter asked. What do you have to say to the HOA? I paused, considering my words carefully. I'd like to thank them, I said finally, for inspiring me. Without their feedback, this masterpiece of petty engineering would never have existed. The segment aired that evening, and I watched myself on TV, talking about my spiral driveway. I felt like a celebrity, I recounted later. Albeit a celebrity with a ridiculously long driveway. Or, technically, a ridiculously short driveway, depending on how you look at it. My 15 minutes of fame had arrived, all thanks to Karen and her obsession with suburban conformity. And honestly, it was glorious. The news of my architectural abomination reached Karen's ears, as I knew it would, with the speed of a gossip wildfire. I pictured her, sitting in her perfectly manicured living room, sipping her perfectly brewed herbal tea, when suddenly, bam, the news flash. Her face, I imagined, would go through a fascinating series of contortions. Disbelief, confusion, then finally, the full crimson bloom of outrage. I didn't have to imagine it for long. The next morning, as I was enjoying my coffee on my newly constructed viewing platform, the highest point of the spiral, naturally, I saw her marching across my lawn, her face a truly impressive shade of purple. "Alexander!" she shrieked, her voice a weaponized foghorn. "What have you done?" "Good morning to you too, Karen," I said calmly, taking a sip of my coffee. "Lovely day, isn't it?" "Lovely day?" she sputtered, her voice rising an octave. "My eyes are bleeding. The neighborhood is in chaos. Children are practically launching themselves into low Earth orbit from your monstrosity." "It's a driveway, Karen," I corrected, gesturing with my coffee mug. "A perfectly safe, HOA-approved compact driveway." "Compact?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "It takes 5 minutes to drive up that thing." "Well," I said, leaning back in my chair, "it does encourage mindful driving. Perhaps you should try it sometime." "Mindful driving," she practically exploded. "This isn't about mindful driving. It's about aesthetics, about conformity, about the sanctity of our suburban paradise." "Sanctity?" I chuckled. "Karen, this isn't a church. It's a neighborhood, with a really cool driveway." She sputtered, her face now a truly alarming shade of magenta. I thought her head was going to explode. It was glorious. You, she stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. "You've ruined everything." "On the contrary," I said, smiling sweetly, "I think I've made things a lot more interesting." She let out a strangled cry, spun on her heel, and stormed off, her arms flailing in the air like a distressed windmill. I watched her go, a sense of deep satisfaction settling over me. Karen, the queen of conformity, had been dethroned, and it was beautiful. The inevitable arrived in the form of another crisp, white, official-looking envelope. This time it was from the HOA's legal team. Yes, they actually had a legal team for driveways. The letter, even more verbose and passive-aggressive than the first, declared my spiral driveway a public nuisance and demanded its immediate removal. "Public nuisance," I scoffed, rereading the letter for the 10th time. "Please, it's not like I'm running a meth lab out of my garage, although that would probably be less annoying to Karen." I chuckled to myself. They were so predictable. They couldn't attack the driveway on aesthetic grounds anymore, so they'd resorted to the public nuisance angle. Classic HOA playbook. I grabbed my trusty copy of the City Building Codes, getting quite a workout lately, and reread the relevant sections. Nothing about spiral driveways being illegal. Nothing about them being a nuisance. In fact, the only thing the code stipulated about driveways was length. A slow, devious grin spread across my face. They'd made a crucial error, a fatal flaw in their bureaucratic armor. They were so focused on the what, a shorter driveway, that they completely forgot about the how. I picked up the phone and called my lawyer. Yes, I have a lawyer. Don't judge. So, I explained to him, they're saying it's a public nuisance. And is it? He asked dryly. Of course not, I said. It's just unconventional. And they only asked for a shorter driveway? He confirmed. That's right, I said gleefully. No stipulations about shape, design, or, spiraling. I see, he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Well then, looks like you found a loophole. A glorious, spiral-shaped loophole, I corrected. Indeed, he chuckled. Leave it with me. I'll draft a response. A few days later, I received a copy of the lawyer's letter. It was a masterpiece of legal pedantry, pointing out the HOA's flawed logic and emphasizing the technical compliance of my driveway. They're so focused on the shorter part, I muttered. They completely forgot about the how part, their mistake, my entertainment. I knew this wasn't over. Karen and the HOA wouldn't give up that easily. But for now, I had won a battle. And the war? Well, the war was just getting interesting. Karen and the HOA, predictably, weren't about to admit defeat. Their next move was straight out of the HOA playbook, the safety card. They announced a mandatory safety inspection of my spiral driveway, claiming it was a hazard to the community. I'm not stupid, I muttered to myself. I knew they'd pull that card. I'd anticipated this move, of course. I wasn't about to build a multi-level concrete spiral without considering safety. I'd already hired a structural engineer, a meticulous fellow with a penchant for hard hats and even harder calculations, to certify the driveway's safety. He'd scrutinized every inch of the ramp, calculated load-bearing capacities, and generally made sure the whole thing wouldn't collapse under the weight of a smart car, let alone my SUV. All structural elements are sound and meet or exceed required safety standards, his report had stated. I had it printed, laminated, and ready to go. I had all my ducks in a row, or, in this case, all my cars on a ramp. The HOA inspectors arrived, clipboards in hand, looking as serious as if they were inspecting a nuclear power plant, not a driveway. They poked and prodded, measured angles, and generally tried to find something, anything, that would justify shutting down my masterpiece. They even brought a level, as if the slight incline of the spiral was somehow going to cause a catastrophic accident. Meanwhile, something unexpected happened. The neighborhood, initially amused by the whole spectacle, started to rally behind me. They'd seen the spiral driveway for what it was, a symbol of rebellion against HOA tyranny. They were tired of Karen's constant nitpicking, her obsessive enforcement of rules that no one cared about. My spiral driveway had become their battle cry. "Don't let them bully you, Alex!" Mrs. Johnson, my normally quiet neighbor, shouted from her porch. "It's your property. You can build whatever crazy driveway you want." "Yeah," chimed in a teenager I didn't even know. "Spiral driveways are awesome." Even Mr. Peterson, the grumpiest man on the block, gave me a thumbs up. "That driveway's a work of art, Alex," he grumbled. "A crazy, beautiful work of art." The support was heartwarming and hilarious. My neighbors are awesome, I thought. They get it. They understand the sheer comedic genius of this whole situation. Then, someone suggested adding a car lift to the top level of the spiral, just to make it even more ridiculous. Now that, I thought, that's an idea I can get behind. The possibilities were endless. A spiral driveway with a car lift? Karen's head would explode. It would be glorious. Karen, bless her rigid, rule-obsessed heart, wasn't going down without a fight. Defeated on the safety front, she resorted to her ultimate weapon, the emergency HOA meeting. A flyer appeared on my doorstep announcing a meeting to discuss a proposed amendment to the neighborhood covenants, a ban on non-standard driveway configurations, specifically targeting spiral designs. She was desperate, I mused, a smirk playing on my lips. You could practically smell the desperation from a mile away. It was intoxicating. This wasn't just about my driveway anymore. It was about Karen's need for control, her desperate attempt to impose order on a world that dared to defy her vision of suburban perfection. And I, armed with my spiral driveway and a PowerPoint presentation, was ready to challenge her reign. The meeting was held in the community center, a beige box of a building that perfectly reflected the HOA's general aesthetic. I arrived early, setting up my laptop and projector, the hum of the machine a subtle counterpoint to the growing murmur of the gathering residents. Karen was there, of course, perched in the front row like a hawk, her eyes fixed on me with a mixture of fury and apprehension. "Let's do this," I whispered to myself, a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. The meeting commenced, and Karen, with the gravitas of a self-proclaimed savior of suburbia, launched into her presentation. She spoke of visual harmony, community standards, and the erosion of property values. It was a masterpiece of fear-mongering, designed to appeal to the HOA's deepest anxieties. Then, it was my turn. I dimmed the lights, the projector flickered to life, and the first slide of my presentation appeared on the screen. The spiral driveway, a case for architectural diversity. I showed them diagrams, charts, graphs, I recounted later. I even had a PowerPoint presentation with animations and sound effects. I went all out. I meticulously deconstructed Karen's arguments, pointing out the inherent subjectivity of visual harmony and the lack of evidence linking spiral driveways to property value decline. Then, I unveiled my trump card, a series of aerial photos showcasing various houses in the neighborhood with driveways that, while not spiraled, were certainly not straight. "Are these driveways also a violation?" I asked, my voice echoing in the stunned silence. "Do they disrupt the visual harmony? Should we ban curves? Should we all be forced to live in a world of right angles and straight lines?" The room erupted. Residents, realizing the implications of Karen's proposed rule, began to voice their dissent. They didn't want to be forced to tear up their own perfectly functional, slightly curved driveways. They saw the absurdity of it all, the sheer pettiness of Karen's crusade. Karen, her face a mask of disbelief and frustration, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The tide had turned. Her desperate attempt to ban spiral driveways had backfired, exposing the absurdity of her own rigid worldview. "This is outrageous!" Mr. Henderson, a man whose driveway had a slight curve to accommodate a mature oak tree, exclaimed, jumping to his feet. "Are you saying I have to tear up my driveway because it's not perfectly straight?" "This is about spiral driveways, Harold," Karen retorted, her voice tight with frustration. "Not about your slightly curved driveway." "Where do you draw the line, Karen?" Mrs. Peterson, whose driveway had a gentle slope, chimed in. "What about my driveway? Is that too curved? Will I have to spend thousands of dollars to rip it up and replace it?" "This is madness," another resident shouted. "We're talking about driveways, people, driveways." The room devolved into a cacophony of voices, each resident expressing their outrage at the implications of Karen's proposed rule. They started to see the light. They realized that Karen's vendetta against my spiral driveway was going to cost them money. And nobody messes with people's wallets. "Order! Order!" Mrs. Higgins, the HOA president, banged her gavel, but it was no use. The residents were in open revolt. Karen, her face a mask of disbelief and frustration, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The tide had turned. Her carefully constructed presentation, her impassioned pleas for conformity, had all backfired. She had underestimated the power of petty grievances and the collective resistance of a neighborhood united against her tyranny. "Let's put it to a vote," Mrs. Higgins announced, sensing the shift in the room. "All those in favor of amending the covenants to ban non-standard driveway configurations, please raise your hand." Karen's hand shot up, followed by, "No one." She looked around the room, her eyes wide with disbelief. Even her usual allies, the die-hard conformists, were hesitant to support her. They'd seen the error of her ways, the potential financial burden of her obsession with straight lines. "All those opposed?" Mrs. Higgins asked. A sea of hands filled the air. The vote was unanimous. Karen had been defeated. She huffed and puffed and stomped her feet like a toddler denied her favorite toy. "This is unfair," she shrieked. "You're all just jealous. You wish you had the guts to build a spiral driveway." With that, she stormed out of the meeting, leaving a trail of stunned silence in her wake. It was the most satisfying thing I'd ever seen. The meeting adjourned, and I was surrounded by my neighbors, congratulating me, thanking me, even offering to help me build that car lift. We had won. The spiral driveway stood, a monument to our collective defiance of Karen's tyranny. And as for Karen, well, let's just say she wasn't seen at the next HOA potluck. Life, as they say, goes on. And in my little corner of suburbia, it went on with a decidedly spiral-shaped twist. The HOA, thoroughly chastened, never again attempted to enforce any rule with even a hint of pettiness. They'd learned their lesson. Don't mess with Alex and their architectural audacity. Karen, however, couldn't cope. The sight of children gleefully whizzing down my spiral driveway on their bikes, the constant stream of tourists snapping pictures of my monstrosity, the sheer joy that seemed to radiate from my little corner of nonconformity. It was all too much for her. So she did what any self-respecting control freak would do. She moved. I heard she moved to a gated community with even stricter rules, my neighbor Mrs. Johnson told me, a hint of glee in her voice. Apparently, they have a committee that approves the color of your curtains. Good for her, I said, stifling a laugh. I'm sure she's much happier there, surrounded by people just as uptight as she is. With Karen gone, the neighborhood seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. We were free. Free to paint our houses slightly off-white, free to plant a slightly crooked row of petunias, free to embrace the glorious imperfection of life. And me? Well, I celebrated my victory in the most fitting way possible. I built another spiral. This one, however, wasn't for cars. It was a smaller, more elegant spiral, designed for pedestrians and bikes. It snaked its way through my front yard, connecting the sidewalk to my driveway, a whimsical, concrete invitation to embrace the joy of the unexpected. If one spiral driveway is good, I reasoned, two must be better, right? The neighborhood, of course, loved it. The kids had a new racetrack, the adults had a new walking path, and I had a new masterpiece to add to my collection of architectural absurdities. The spiral driveway and its pedestrian counterpart became a local landmark. People came from miles around to see it, to take selfies with it, to marvel at its sheer audacity. It was featured in the local newspaper, then the regional magazine, and finally, in a bizarre twist of fate, in a national architectural journal. It's on all the tourist maps now, I told my friend, shaking my head in disbelief. People come from all over the world just to see my driveway. I'm practically a celebrity. And it wasn't just tourists. Architecture students came to study it, artists came to sketch it, and even a few urban planners came to, well, I'm not sure what they were doing, but they seemed very impressed. The spiral driveway, born out of spite and a healthy dose of defiance, had become something more. It was a symbol of individuality, a testament to the power of creative expression, a middle finger to the forces of conformity. It was a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight the absurdity of the world is with a little absurdity of your own. And as I stood there, watching the sun set over my spiral-shaped creation, a sense of peace settled over me. I had won. I had defeated the HOA, vanquished Karen, and created something truly unique. The spiral driveway was my legacy, a concrete testament to the enduring power of petty revenge. And it was beautiful.